You'll see at the top of the lecture outline the learning outcomes. The learning outcomes basically specify what we want you to get out of this chapter, out of this section. So if you can do what the learning outcomes specify, you're good. If there were, I think we've got 7 of them. If there were 7 things we wanted you to be able to do with this material, those are the 7 that we're looking for. So keep those in mind as we are going through the material. Today, our theme verse is going to be Proverbs 18:17. You've probably heard this one before. The one who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examines him. We'll see if you can figure out as we go along why we chose that first. So, John Stuart Mill. Why are we reading John Stuart Mill's Utilitarianism? Well, first of all, you may remember all the way back in Humanities 201, we read some of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, and we talked about his moral philosophy. And then in 202, we went from Aristotle's ethics to Boethius and his plight. Does anyone remember what happened to Boethius in the Consolation of Philosophy? Yeah, basically in exile for being falsely accused of plotting against the king. He's crying out to God, crying out against God, and who should show up but philosophy, Christian philosophy, as a woman. And she talks with him and she diagnoses what his problem is. And she says, the reason you're so upset about this is because you've forgotten what the goal and purpose of existence is, and you've forgotten what it means to be human. And that's all taken from Aristotle. So what did Aristotle say? He said, all of our acts aim. Whenever we act, we aim at something we take to be good. That's why you do something rather than nothing at all. You think there's something of value worth getting. And there are some things you aim at in the immediate future, but you want those things because there's something further along, more ultimate, that you're aiming at, that you want. Aristotle says, whatever that thing is, you think it's the good, the one thing worth having more than anything else. And you ask people, okay, what do you want out of life? What would most people say if you were to ask them? Yeah. Want to be happy? Is that what you normally find to be the case? That's what most people want, right? That's what they're ultimately aiming for, to be happy. So Aristotle says we're all aiming for what we take to be the good. We can't help it. We orchestrate our lives around it. And we all want to be happy. So we must think happiness is the good. Now, from a Christian point of view, doesn't that just strike you as wrong-headed? Aristotle's saying the good is happiness. What do you mean the good is happiness? What does morality have to do with happiness? Isn't morality the stuff you do that sometimes makes you unhappy? The things we would rather not do? What is the connection? When people give up on morality, what do they usually say? I'm just going to do what makes me happy, right? What's the connection? Well, the reason this seems so implausible to us is because we're thinking of happiness in a very modern way, not in the way Aristotle thinks of happiness. We've got a very modern conception. Aristotle would say our conception is completely and radically mistaken. When we think of happiness as a feeling, as something that happens to you, as an experience. Happiness is an experience, then it's going to be incredibly unstable. Because how often do you have the exact same experiences? How often do you get up in the morning and feel slightly different than you did the day before? And you don't feel particularly happy. But Aristotle says, yeah, no wonder you don't think we should be aiming for happiness. That's not worth having. Aristotle says happiness for us as human beings is flourishing, achieving our good, our function, our purpose. So just as knives have a function, which is to cut well, just as toasters have a function, which is to toast bread well, you have a function. We all do. We all have the same function, to live well. And why is it that the function of a knife is to cut well? Well, look at a knife. Seems like that's what it's good for, right? Why is it that what is the function of a human being? I mean, what could be our purpose, our end? Well, look at human beings. What are they good for? Whatever it is, achieving that is genuine happiness, true happiness. So what would Christians say that thing is? What is our function, our purpose? What's that? Okay. And not just reflect him, but also be close in some way to him, right? To know God. And that's supposed to bring about genuine happiness, right? So Aristotle says, yeah, the good, happiness, they're one and the same thing, because happiness for us is human flourishing. All right, that sounds okay. Mill comes along centuries later and says, I like Aristotle's idea. In fact, I agree. We should all aim for happiness. But where Aristotle seems to go wrong, Mill does go completely wrong. Because Mill says, and happiness is a feeling, an experience, something that happens to you, something that is unstable, unpredictable. He's ultimately going to say that happiness is pleasure minus pain. Now, what does that have to do with morality? Because what Mill is doing in utilitarianism is trying to offer us a theory of what the morally good life looks like. And yet that's his conception of happiness. And this move Mill makes is part of a general trend that starts in the 1600s, moves into the 1700s, picks up steam during the 1800s and 1900s, and then explodes in the 20th and 21st centuries. This trend of taking things that we thought existed in the world and pushing them into the mind. Happiness, Aristotle said, is objective. It has to do with the well-lived life. Mill says, no, it's subjective. It's a feeling. We're told that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. People didn't always think that. They used to think beauty was a feature of the world. Things were actually beautiful. A mountain range was actually beautiful. And you recognized the beauty, and that's why you said, wow, that's beautiful. But the subjectivist says, no, it's all in the eye of the beholder. Beauty is not about what's going on out here, it's about what's going on in here. Something is beautiful simply if it affects me in a certain way, all in the eye of the beholder. So to say God's creation is beautiful is not to commend God in any way. You're just talking about yourself and how God's creation affects you. We thought we were talking about that beautiful mountain range. You're just talking about yourself and how you feel about that mountain range. Beauty becomes subjectivized. We'll see next morality becomes subjectivized, so that David Hume in the 1700s argues that not only is beauty subjective and in the eye of the beholder, but so is morality. Morality is in the eye of the beholder as well. You are the standard of what's right or wrong. You determine what's right or wrong by approving or disapproving of it. You cause things become right or wrong by feeling a certain way about them. Rightness or wrongness isn't a part of the world. It's really in you. Love becomes very subjective. Love is no longer recognizing the value in someone and desiring union with them. It's a feeling. You know, that feeling you get when you feel like singing and the birds are always chirping and the sky is always clear for some reason and the flowers are always blooming. That's love. Love is really just something that happens to you. It's really an effect. If love is like that, no wonder people fall in and out of love so often. And then what happens is when we get to the 1900s, people start to subjectivize truth. And they say truth is in the eye of the beholder. And then the big thing that happens is reality becomes completely subjective. Beauty, love, happiness, right and wrong, truth, everything becomes subjective. So now we find people saying that reality is really this amorphous lump of dough, the cookie cutter view of reality. And our minds are the cookie cutters. And we all have different cookie cutters based on our upbringing. And no cookie cutter is better than any other. We just produce different looking cookies. So there's no such thing as male or female, right or wrong, or even God for that matter. God, people say, exists for you, but he doesn't exist for me. I'm still not sure how that's supposed to be possible. But hey, I guess God's a part of that amorphous lump of dough as well. And you just happen to have the cookie cutter that looks like God. So yeah, continue to believe in God if that works for you, but it doesn't work for me, and we're all right. That's the subjectivist view of reality. That's the state we're in now. So that's one reason why we're looking at mills, because we are now seeing this trend of taking things that people thought were really real and pushing them into the mind.